So this morning, transformation and light. The Tibetan frequently instructed his disciples about the light in the head. I remember those first few years of reading the Tibetan's books and being so curious about the light in the head. My curiosity was because I had had the experience and, of course, saw several doctors who could not resolve what it was. They didn't understand it. I didn't understand it. So as I began reading in the Tibetan's books about the light in the head, eventually I found the answers. And to realize that actually it is not necessary to specifically see the light in the head. But there comes a time when you have that experience, at least now you will know that it is a spiritual experience. It's always better to go check out an experience like that with your doctor first to make sure that it's not a health problem. But if they can't diagnose it, then you know that it is a spiritual phenomenon. So what is it like? What is light and how does it manifest? This is what the teaching says. The teaching says that light is the result of radioactivity or radioactive fire that's within each atom, and that this radioactive fire is also within each human form. The teaching tells us that the origin of all life is fire. See, this is very esoteric, and unless you're a scientist, maybe even if you are a scientist, it would make it more difficult to think about. So when I study ideas like this, I let my imagination develop and to think about the fact that, okay, so light is the radiation of fire within each atom of my being. And then I'll look at a tree, because every Sunday morning when our louvers are open and I look straight out, I see this beautiful pine tree. So this morning I'm asking myself and thinking about the atoms in that live tree, and that every atom has a radiation of fire. And of course it's this radiation of fire that gives the tree life. And it is the same for us. So to just, we don't necessarily have to know the specifics of what that radiating fire is, but just to realize this is what gets us up in the morning. This is what sustains us throughout our life. And also to realize that some people have more fire than others. So this is something we want to pay particularly more attention to than what the actual fire is, but how to increase that fire. And what does it mean to have an increased radiation of fire, releasing the light from within each atom? This is the process of transformation. As this radiating fire is released from within our atomic structure, our light increases. As our light increases, transformation begins. Now, this fire can be found in different degrees of manifestation, from material fire to spiritual fire. From material fire to spiritual fire. When we think of a spiritual fire, or at least I do, I think about the human soul. At the same time, when we look at nature, we know that there are certain elements in nature, like certain flowers, that are more beautiful than other flowers. Some flowers are just meant to be beautiful. Some flowers have significance to the human kingdom. So I think that even in the animal kingdom and the plant kingdom and the mineral kingdom, I think the radiation of fire coming from each atom of each object in these lower kingdoms also could be recognized as spiritual, but a little bit different from the spiritual fire coming from within the divine spark of a human being. But nonetheless, the teaching tells us that the origin of all life is fire. Now, let's talk about the light in the head. This is from the teaching. We're told the light in the head is a diffused light. It is a diffused light. This diffused light comes from the etheric atoms of which the brain is composed. So we're talking about the etheric brain and the physical brain. And this is where the diffused light comes from when you experience this light in the head. It's a diffusion of light coming from the etheric physical atoms in the brain. The diffused light is normally the first stage. Okay? The diffused light is normally the first stage which you might experience, which is called the light in the head. But this is only the first stage. In the second stage, that light becomes brighter. Now, the reason Val read to us this morning about the virtue of aspiration is because it's at this stage, as the light is becoming brighter, it's the result of our aspiration, our aspirational striving. So therefore, it is the aspirant. See how that word gets in there? Okay. Aspiration, the aspirant, the aspiring spiritual student begins to strive. And when this occurs, his soul makes contact with the etheric light. And now that etheric light, that increasing light that's becoming brighter, has a term. And it's called the sun in the head. The third and later stage occurs when the bright electric light is experienced. This phenomenon occurs when there is interplay between the light of your solar angel and the etheric and atomic atoms of light in the brain. So there's an exchange of electrical phenomena or electrical energy between the light of the soul and the etheric atoms that are in your brain. That light in your brain. Not all who have attained an advanced state of consciousness will typically see this brain radiance. And it's important to realize that this is not something that you're going to aspire to. It's just a natural phenomenon. When this phenomena occurs, if you actually have the experience, it can be very distracting. It can be distracting in your day-to-day life. It can be distracting when you're trying to go to sleep at night because that light is still there. And that light can sustain itself for days at a time. Other experiences will find that light becoming recognizable during heightened periods of energy throughout the year. It can be experienced during certain important cyclic meetings held by hierarchy. So your question would be, well, why? Why during certain heightened times of cyclic energy, or when hierarchy meets at certain planned times throughout history? Because there is a reverberation that takes place. And that reverberation is a process that comes through space, from Shambhala to hierarchy to the ashram, and from the ashram through the master and senior disciples, connecting you with the whole process of energetic exchange. And what is happening during that energetic exchange is that your etheric and physical brain are now being impressed with some changes to the plan. Okay? Normally, it is determined, this experience of diffuse light, or the sun in the head, or that interplay of light taking place between the solar angel and the etheric atoms in your brain, is determined by the caliber of your physical body, your past karma and achievements, and your ability to bring down the higher fires. Your ability to bring down the higher fires. For example, when the creative activities of a person have activated their heart and throat centers, there is going to be an interplane or an interplay of energy taking place between the heart and the throat, and this will connect with corresponding advanced atoms. See, there's always the higher. There's always the higher. Some people don't like to think about anything higher than themselves, right? Look what they're missing out on. To make contact with something greater than ourselves, something that vibrates at a higher frequency than ourselves, requires striving. And this is what we want for our unfolding human soul, to be charged with the fire of greater atoms, atoms of a higher frequency, atoms that have a greater merit, a greater virtue, and value and wisdom. This occurrence oftentimes finds the person then experiencing the light in the head. The interplay of energies between the heart and throat, I'm going back now to the heart and throat, interplay of energy. This interplay of energies between the heart and throat centers evokes a response from what? It's going to evoke, hear the word response. This interplay of energy between the throat center and the heart center evokes a response from the chalice, your chalice, the flames of the chalice. And when this occurs, the light in the head manifests. The radioactivity of the fires of the petals of love and knowledge, plus the light of the soul, evokes higher fires. It's evoking higher fires, higher chalices, more advanced chalices, to which your soul is going to respond. In order for your human soul to evolve, it must pass through various stages of the fires of transformation. Or we could say the fires of transformation would be the stages of enlightenment. When our consciousness progresses, we need higher fires. I think this is the occult side of devotion, of why we should devote ourselves to something greater than ourselves, to some object that is permeated, with a greater resonance, a higher frequency, and so forth. If we cannot make a higher contact, a greater contact, if we cannot find a greater fire through which we can make contact, our consciousness is not going to progress. Isn't that interesting? So this is really something for you to think about. The greater a person's light, the more radioactive his or her creative nature is going to be. So what is creativity? Creativity is the ability to contact higher fires. Now there's a catch. As we develop the ability to contact higher fires, we must express these higher fires through a pure mechanism. If our mechanism is not pure, then we're going to distort the light. If our mechanism is pure, as we are expressing the fires through the mechanism, then the true expression of that light is going to take place. In other words, the original idea will manifest in its original form instead of a distorted form. The light released from the higher fires manifests through all of our thoughts and through all of our creative forms. For example, if you come in contact with the creative form of an enlightened one, your inner fire is going to be affected by the fountain of light of that enlightened one's consciousness. When this occurs, then for a few moments, you're going to experience an elevation of your consciousness. When you are around a person like that for years, and then that person withdraws themselves, we are then left to our own light. So if our light is connected with that greater light, if we've made a contact with that greater light, and there's been an interplay, a constant interplay between ourselves and that greater one, when that greater one pulls himself or herself away physically, withdraws physically, then your consciousness will not reduce itself. That light will not be reduced. But if you have been able to sustain a contact with that greater light, your consciousness will continue to sustain the light that took place between the two. And there's a lot to talk about with that. I don't have time, but it's something to think about, for you to think about, how this occurs. Spiritual tension is important to sustain that light and to sustain any change in your being, in your beingness. So when you have that momentary experience of a heightened consciousness or heightened sensitivity, or an increase of light that is released from your own atomic structure, those first few times it's going to be extremely difficult to change or to sustain it because you're not yet ready, but you're inspired. You know, you have that moment of inspiration, now you want more of it and more of it and more of it. And you begin to aspire toward the source of that inspiration. When you come in contact with the radiation emanating from an object that was created by or worn by an enlightened being, you are coming in contact with higher atoms. Atoms which possess virtue and wisdom and truth. When your fire unites with the radiation of the fire in higher atoms, it initiates a transformation. For example, when I was given a pendant that was designed and worn by Helena Rourke, I came in contact with higher atoms, the atoms that possess virtue and wisdom and truth. When our fire unites with the radiation of the fire in higher atoms, it initiates a transformation. I was also blessed with a pencil that Alice Bailey wrote with. Imagine that. I was given a pen that Torquem Saradarian used to write some of his books with. See, we live in a society today, even in the esoteric community, they don't understand what a treasure house it is. You know, to come in contact with objects of higher atoms. It is by being in the radiation of higher atoms we find ourselves protected from darkness. This is why we always want to throw our hat in the ring of any enlightened being. It is a form of protection. When you make contact with an enlightened group, you are automatically protected. It is so beautiful. Transformation elevates our beingness, especially if we are able to sustain the radiation of transforming energies. Remember this, you know, what we are experiencing here is transforming energies. If we can sustain these transforming energies, our consciousness is going to progress. Our unfolding human soul is going to advance. But if our God is money, is our Mercedes-Benz, is our bank account, is our house, is our crummy life, we're not going to advance. We're not going to change. We're going to be the same monkey heads that we were 50 years ago or 10 years ago. So transformation elevates our beingness if we can sustain the radiation of these transforming energies. The result is recognized through a gradual change in our level of self-confidence. Now, self-confidence is not an exaggerated personality. It is our soul in greater contact with our monad, or AKA the capital S self. This then is reflected in the way we walk, the tone of our voice, and other behaviors that affect our beingness. And why is this, you ask? It is because our light is increasing. So it is through transformation that our light increases. When we come in contact with the spiritual fires of a higher realm, the light released from that realm enters into our aura. It is there the fire begins to transform the substance of the centers in the fourth, third, second, and first levels of the etheric body. Now, the last 2 or 3 Sundays I've passed out, and we've posted them on our YouTube, a couple of diagrams where you can see those centers that come from the fourth, third, second, and first levels of the etheric body. So it's a substance coming from these centers that must be transformed with something greater than what it is now. When this action takes place, it produces spiritual tension. You know what this spiritual tension is also called? The burning ground. The burning ground through which our consciousness and beingness slowly undergoes transformation. Thus, Agni Yoga, the yoga of spiritual fire, is the path of transformation. If we put our life in an environment of beauty, the radiation of the objects of beauty will gradually bring about transmutation, bring about a transmutation and transformation of our physical, etheric, astral, and mental bodies. Now, contrary to this, if we place ourselves in an environment which is ugly, of a low vibration, where there is no light, then what's going to happen? There will be no growth, only darkness. Such an environment will eventually destroy the radiation of that fire coming from our atomic nature. And it puts us in depression. It puts us in illness and eventual decay. It is for this reason we must carefully and consciously choose to live in a healthy physical, emotional, and mental environment. So some people may say or think, well, isn't this kind of choice separative? Elitist? You know, absolutely not. We only need to be in an environment of darkness for a short period of time to experience what it is like. Some people are trained to be warriors of light, trained to carry a torch in the darkness, to engage in a battle with darkness. And I'm quoting a phrase here from the Scorpio keynote, "Warrior I am, and from the battle I emerge triumphant." We're headed towards Scorpio. We have Libra next Sunday. We're going to have our Libra celebration, and then we'll be moving into Scorpio. So this is a good time to think about, you know, what does it mean to be a warrior of light? But until one is ready to engage in such a battle, it is better to choose an environment that is permeated with light and love and beauty. On my blog, a question was posed a couple of days ago: must a warrior be trained? And yes, and I put that answer on the blog this morning. So if you're subscribed to the blog, you can find the answer there. I think we are living in times where darkness is all around us. We must be cautious and discerning and vigilant to that fact, and not invite darkness into our lives. But if we find ourselves in such an environment, then there is a remedy. And this remedy can be found through meditation and realizing that you cannot save everyone. Through meditation, realizing you cannot save everyone, and then make certain you surround yourself with a loving circle of friends. So I mentioned that aspiration is required for transformation. Let us say that aspiration is understood as a desire to change ourselves. It must come from a higher calling. That higher calling can come from outside ourselves in terms of an environment, a condition, a situation, a person inspiring us to do better, to be better. It can come as a result of a dream, or because your life is just disappointed you to such a degree that you're making a decision, I'm going to get out of this situation. And you become inspired with the desire to change yourself and your level of beingness. Then you've got to have the energy and the organization to begin making those changes. So inspiration, we are told in the teachings, is a source of aspiration. When we become inspired, then we aspire to change ourselves, to become someone better, more creative, happier, joyful, and to become more beautiful. A teacher can inspire us. A teaching can inspire us. An object permeated with higher light can inspire us. So inspiration is a call, an energy which comes to us from a higher source to invite us to work on a higher level. See how this is happening, advancing? You know, it's like we connect to this and this and this, make a contact with a higher fire, and the result is we begin to work on ourselves. See? We work on a higher level. Or do some labor that we were not ready to do in the past, but we are now presently capable of doing. This is the result of making contact, sustaining that contact with a higher fire, greater energy. So inspiration ignites aspiration from within our unfolding human soul. And it's then we find we want to change ourselves. If you're in a meditation course, it's interesting to pull out your course reports. This is one of the reasons we write, our report and send it in to the meditation secretary. So the secretary and ourselves, we can measure from 10 years ago for those meditation reports to today. Have I stayed the same? Am I regurgitating the same thing over and over and over? Or am I making breakthroughs and functioning and working in higher levels? The increasing creative fire occurs as a result of spiritual tension. The increasing creative fire occurs as a result of soul contact with the light and love and will of the greater self, our higher self, or through coming in contact with objects of an enlightened being, such as his writings, creative works, paintings, and so forth. As we undergo the process of transformation, it is important to realize that we are making a commitment to our soul. In other words, to recognize the process of transformation requires commitment. And this commitment is not to anybody or anything outside of ourselves. It is to our unfolding human soul. So we must really think about this process of transformation to ascertain if we are really ready to take this next step of our evolution. As disciples encounter the tensions of the path through their labors and travels and fiery experiences, they see the effects reflected in their many creative endeavors. In this thought, we can then understand how tension, when used constructively, leads to transformation. A question most spiritual students eventually ask, from where do we get light? So now we're taking the next step, where we understand that the fiery radiation that is occurring within each atom and releases light must be connected to something even greater. And that something greater is from what we call the eternal source. And this eternal source is called the abode of light, such as Shambhala. But there are other abodes of light. The abode of light is reflected. This is important to think about. Reflection, reflection, reflection. In the Agni Yoga teachings, we read about mirrors. Mirrors, hyphen, parentheses, reflection. Okay. The abode of light is reflected in different fiery centers of light on earth. Centers called mystery schools. Schools of the ageless wisdom. Centers in which are reflected the abode of light in all their creative endeavors, their labors, their service, and their advancing activities. When we walk from the darkness into the light, we know the difference. We sense that difference. The more sensitive, or the greater the degree of our sensitivity, the greater we're going to recognize the difference. I recall the first time when I walked into the Rourke Museum of Art in New York City. For me, it was an experience of walking into an abode of light. The light radiating from the creative fires of the Master. It penetrated into every cell and every atom of my being, and I never wanted to leave that most wonderful abode of light. And in fact, I never did. Once I entered into the museum, a most beautiful man met us, introducing himself as the director of the museum. His greeting was like being handed a rod of fire, of light, which we could then pass on to others, and which we subsequently, in fact, have done this very thing through our many group endeavors. I recently read that whenever you light a candle, a fiery deva appears and dances around it. One deva attracts germs, microbes, and viruses in the air and burns them. So next time we participate in a candle lighting ceremony, take the lighted candle in your hand and remember that you will have fiery devas all around you. You will feel different, act differently, think differently. You will feel so healthy and pure. There are 3 essential methods by which we can increase our light. and I'm nearly done. Those 3 essential points are meditation, discipline, and service. Meditation, regular and continuous meditation, increases the flame of our light, gradually elevating our consciousness and beingness to where we actually contact, not imaginatively contact, the light of our solar angel and higher stations of light. However, if we begin meditation and then stop, begin again and stop, begin again and stop, what happens is that our light will begin to flicker. And we'll find that person with various and complicated spiritual and psychological problems. It is for this reason we are told that once we begin to meditate, it needs to be steady and regular. As the light increases within our nature, we are enabled to think and speak and serve in the radiance of that light. Now, discipline. Discipline is a transformational technique. So on the blog, we're talking about living a transformational life. This is the process of living the transformational life. Means meditation. It means discipline. It is through living a transformational life, through the technique of discipline, that we change ourselves. It is a way in which we become tuned to the note of what? A higher light. When a merging takes place between our solar angel and ourselves, between our personality and the soul, all conflict and disharmony between the higher and the lower light disappears. Okay. Service is the 3rd point. Service is to give our light, love, and power to others in the form of these 7 principles that we know so well: beauty, goodness, righteousness, joy, freedom, service, and sacrificial striving. Sacrificial service and striving. It works. Those people who really want to undergo the experience of transformation and increasing their light are those who really want to change themselves and willing to do all that is necessary to change. There are some who will never see a need to change, and some who see there is a need but don't want to put forth the effort into changing themselves. You will also find some people who want to change but are prevented from doing so because of their present conditions and situations. But those who really want transformation will do all that is necessary to bring that change about, and thus increase their beauty and love and light and wisdom. And of course, these are the people that make up the new group of world servers. So that's transformation and light. We are so out of time, so I don't have questions, time for questions and answers. But again, I encourage you to go read that blog, because the most recent posting in the blog talks about these things. And we encourage you to post your own comments so that we can learn from everybody.